cannabis industry friends and colleagues. I'm Jeanine Moss, the chair of NCIA's Marketing and Advertising Committee. I'm also an entrepreneur, brand marketer, and communicator. I'm joined today by my business partner, Nicole DeMeo. She's an accomplished business launch, growth, turnaround, and crisis expert. We've worked together on worldwide crises such as the 9/11 terrorist attacks, recovery after Hurricane Katrina, and numerous natural disasters and business crises. A couple weeks ago, we were creating brand strategy, positioning, and messaging for clients. And then all of a sudden, it's a 180, and we're fully consumed in counseling clients on crisis response. That's when it really hit us, the same way it did after 9/11, that we knew that we wanted to do something to help. So over the past week, we put together a presentation for NCIA and you to share approaches and perspectives to help you navigate the coming weeks and months. We're going to share some thinking processes, perspectives, and philosophies. And we encourage you to download the NCIA Crisis Communications Manual from NCIA's website. That was created for exactly this type of situation. One thing I want to acknowledge is that we're all kind of feeling pretty iffy right now. And uncertainty is probably one of the hardest things to adjust to. And, I think probably all of us are a little bit concerned about making decisions when we don't have a lot of information. We're feeling also some intense responsibilities to our employees and the people who depend on us, including our families. And, I just want to say that that's the way we are feeling. And if you're feeling that way too, we're all in this together. So let's get right into it and talk about how to get your arms around this crisis and do your best to protect and propel your organization and your people as we move forward. But I'd like to take a moment right now to introduce you to Nicole and her sonorous voice. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole DeMeo, and it's an honor to be with you today. We're here in service to the cannabis community, and we invite you to turn to us. I wanted to just say a little bit more about Jeanine. Many of you know Jeanine as the CEO of Cannabis, the chic and discreet cannabis accessories company. What you might not realize is that Jeanine is a real veteran in crisis communications. She's worked for New York City tourism, dealt with the World Trade Center bombing in the 90s. Of course, she mentioned the September 11th fund and many, many crises for both organizations and large corporations as well. So we're here and we are bringing all of that background and experience to you today so that you can really do whatever you possibly can to make this a greater and more successful outcome. We formed Outfront Solutions, which is our company where we stand shoulder to shoulder with business leaders like you to build marketing and communications programs that foster organizational resilience, continuity, and growth. And no matter what type of crisis or monumentous event you may be facing, we're here to help you establish trust and loyalty across your multiple stakeholder groups to get that successful outcome. So in our webinar today, we're facing a pandemic, and this will be a paradigm shift in how we live and do business, all over the world. So things will not go back to business as usual, which means that this is a time to take a stand on how you want to move and operate your brand. So now more than ever, we want to stay grounded in truth, in our values, and just remember that political upheavals or global pandemics or whatever's happening, those are really opportunities for us to rise above them. Jeanine, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
So I really love this quote because it points to the fact that even in the face of a huge recession, Sam Walton decided he wasn't going to accept what it was dishing out. He was going to stay in control. And you can do that too with this crisis. I'm sure you know the psychological principle that the only thing you can control is your reaction to things. And this is just such a moment. You can't control the crisis, but you can take control of your reaction to it. So how do you do that? What actions can you take right now that'll create the best possible outcome for you and your business, your stakeholders, and just about everyone in the world who's affected right now? In this webinar, we're going to outline the steps to take back control now during COVID-19. So the first step is discovery. In a crisis, everything depends on information and facts. Those facts are going to be the backbone of your crisis communications program to all stakeholders. The plan involves how you address the facts in regard to a broad number of stakeholders. People have been asking us a lot of questions about that to inform their plans, so we're going to cover some of those later in the webinar. And messaging is crucial. You'll be doing a lot of it over the coming weeks and months. And so we're going to provide a communications framework and address some of the outstanding questions there. There's also a great opportunity to learn from others right now. Since we're all home, we're getting bombarded by communications. So we're going to look at some of those and discuss what works and what doesn't. And finally, we're going to look at compassionate creativity. Wow, some brands are really showing what they can do and really coming out of the box to support their communities. And they're mapping back to their brand personality and values. So we're going to talk about some of those and show you what some people are doing. And before we go there, I just want to tell you a quick story about the importance of the discovery process. When I was hired to work for the September 11th Fund right after the terrorist attacks, I show up for work and my boss, Josh Gottbaum, the CEO, says, okay, there's your office down on the left. Go in there, figure out what we need, and come see me at 2 p.m. Tell me what we have to do. So I walk into my office, I turn on the computer, and there is nothing there. Nothing, bupkis, no bios, no fact sheets, nothing about the organization, nothing. So I thought, oh gosh, I hadn't done that before. So I went out and I started interviewing every single person who had anything to do with setting up the fund. And that was the New York Community Trust and the United Way. So I come back at 2 o'clock, I go to see Josh and I say, okay, Josh, our mission is to help victims, families, and communities affected by this tragedy. But no one knows what a victim is, or a family, or a community. And no one knows how much was taken in, given out, what it went for, what the needs are, and the need is going crazy. Bill O'Reilly was busy beating us up every single night on national TV, saying that we were riding around in limousines and eating at fancy restaurants, which I guarantee you was not true. I was stealing candy from people's desks. So I say, you have two choices, Josh. Change the mission, or it's going to take 3 months to gather the facts we need to combat the wave of negative press. So Josh says, we're sticking with the mission, go out and get the facts. It took us from October to December to go out, find out what was going on, get reports from everybody, and start issuing those out on a regular basis. And we turned around the negative perception based on those facts. And I tell you this story because this is what we mean by discovery. The first thing you need to know is what the situation is on the ground. And so what Nicole and I know after going through a lot of crises is that you want to be part of the solution. That's why we're here today, and we're betting that that's you too. So let me hand it back to Nicole.
Yeah, we just want to tell you a little bit more what we mean by discovery in this situation today. So everyone here probably has heard of discovery. It's what lawyers do when they're preparing for a case. They gather all available information so that they can analyze it and come up with a thesis of their case and assemble supporting information to support it. Most of us in communications and marketing also conduct discovery with our clients. We spend a considerable amount of time analyzing the client's business, the environment in which they operate, the ultimately producing analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You've heard of that SWOT analysis. So we do this so that we can identify our audiences, understand their issues and concerns, and build on what an organization does well and address any negatives thoughtfully. So in this discovery process, we're going to guide you through and explore how to take control of the situation, what are the potential scenarios, and some research about that, the stages of the crisis, addressing all of your stakeholder groups, and putting people first. So let's go to taking control. With taking control, you have the ability to truly take control of the situation. These are steps you can take to control and provide leadership. So first, during any crisis, you need information. So that starts with a situational analysis of your stakeholders, where they are, what are they facing, how do they feel, what are their concerns. All good crisis communications programs start with people. The reason you do this is so that you can first understand their needs and see what you need to do to address them. And two, this informs the response plan. Next, you really need to develop a response plan with goals so that the situational assessment focuses on the realistic goals that map to what your stakeholders want and need so that you can properly support them. We'll have much more about a response plan coming up and even a downloadable guide later in this webinar. We have the power to design the customer experience in store, online, in social, and you control what you say, how you say it, and where you say it. You also have the power to collaborate. You don't have to know everything in a crisis, but you do want to commit to finding the answers that the majority of your stakeholders are asking. The great thing about collaboration is that you can pull in your customers, vendors, and other experts to help you answer those questions. And finally, how you help is totally your call. Some people are delivering food to first responders. Some people have cut prices. We now have legal curbside pickup at dispensaries. So you are the final decision maker for all of these factors, which are critical to your business, your employees, and your customers, and everyone's well-being. Here are some scenarios that we took a look at, put out by McKinsey, which is a management consulting firm. They boiled down some research into two scenarios. On the left, you have a delayed recovery response, and that's based on the virus spreading, they believe, over the course of the next months, and we would not see economic relief until Q4 of 2020. So that's with people adhering to public health policies, the virus being seasonal, and consumer spending resuming by the end of the year. On the right, we have prolonged contraction. So in a more dramatic scenario, McKinsey believes that the recovery doesn't happen until Q2 of 2021. So this means that there would be severe consumer spending contraction similar to that of 2008 or 2009 crisis. So whichever scenario plays out, or if a new one emerges, it looks like we should be planning to address this crisis for the remainder of 2020 at best. Consider what this might mean for your business. Now, Jeanine's going to take us through the stages of the crisis.
So this is a tool that Nicole and I have developed from our experience. And we did that because stakeholder feelings, beliefs, and behaviors change as you move through the crisis. And your messaging will ultimately map to these stages. So the early warning stage is when you get a whiff of the crisis. Large companies are using listening tools to keep their pulse on what's happening and what sentiment is doing. You can do that too, by the way, in your own social processes. The first case of COVID-19 in the US was January 20th. By that time, some companies were already working on crisis scenarios to get out in front, and they would have been the first to get the equipment and supplies they needed. The escalation phase is when least is known. That's when probably everyone feels most out of control. During 9/11, we didn't know how many people were affected, what they were facing, how the world would change. And that's us right now during this coronavirus outbreak. A decrease is what we're all praying for, and it's worth noting that with this virus, the infection rate may decrease over the summer, but it also might increase again in September. So things don't always go in a straight line. You should be prepared for that. And you don't want to do what George Bush did in the Gulf War and declare victory in our messaging too soon. So I want to add here another little tip. Don't ever speculate in your messaging about anything coming down the pike. If it's not fact today, don't include it. The stabilization phase is where everything begins to go back to normal. That's when there's a lot of education needed about telling people that it's business as usual. When we wanted people to know that Lower Manhattan was open for business after the first Trade Center bombing in 1993, we listed all the attractions downtown and we published the numbers of visitors attending them on a given day. So that did two things. It told people that there were attractions downtown, which they didn't know then, and that people were going to them, so it was safe. So you can be creative in your messaging in that sense. And finally, we're going to definitely have a cultural shift. Will we ever not be germaphobes in the future? Should your next trade show giveaway be hand sanitizer? Your communications during a crisis is going to map to these stages, and the key is knowing the facts on the ground. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's so important. So we've mentioned a lot about stakeholders, and most people think that means employees and customers, but I'll bet you have a lot more. You probably have a pretty robust supply chain from growers, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers to a host of vendors. One company we're counseling is a worldwide apparel company, and they want to communicate with employees and tell them everything is okay. But they don't know really what to say because employment is based on sales. And the customers they're selling to have closed their stores, so there's no sales for them. And that also means that this company isn't buying anything from their suppliers. They now recognize they have to communicate across the whole ecosystem, renegotiate prices with vendors, negotiate payment terms with customers, and they're going to cut salaries for employees. But they have a plan. And we're going to talk, we've got a great example to share with you about that later. The key takeaway is to look at all your stakeholder groups and ask yourself if you know how the virus is impacting them and disrupting you. And then ask yourself what you need from each group and what they need and expect from you. And then you start the dialogue. This will not be the first time you communicate during this crisis. So remember the quote that said, "It's the economy, stupid," during the Clinton administration? Well, it's not the economy, it's the people who matter. And it should go without saying, but we're seeing a lot of communications come across our desk that seems like there's no awareness of people's concerns at this time. So people are scared, they're worried about rent, they don't know if they'll have jobs. So you need to be sensitive about how you address them now. The next time you review a piece of communication, do ask yourself, does this put people first? And if it doesn't, don't approve it. So now we're going to talk about making your plan, and we thought we'd take some of the share some of the questions we're getting about planning right now. This is also a great time to download the NCIA Crisis Communications Manual. You'll find it on their website. This is an incredible tool. It's the result of a mind meld of many communicators with tons of experience and with the assistance of one of the top crisis communications firms in the world, Burson Cohn Wolf. They also work with us at Outfront Solutions. We referred to this manual for this webinar. It has great templates for messaging, phone trees, information on media training, possible crisis scenarios. They were super helpful. And at Outfront Solutions, we start with discovery, then we develop a strategy, and then that informs the implementation plan. And this manual can help you go through that process. So now we're going to have Nicole read you some of the questions we're getting about the plan.
Yeah, we've been talking to people on the ground and have been collecting their questions to share with you here so that you consider some of these top questions that keep coming in. The first one is, people just want to know, can I sell now? Should I be selling?
So I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to answer it by saying there's a couple things to ask yourself. The first is, do people actually need your product or service right now? You can't believe what I'm seeing people try to sell me as I sit at home and in concern and anxiety. So if people need your product or service now, then you should communicate. But you got to make sure you're communicating to the right stakeholder group about why it's necessary and acknowledging how they're feeling right now. And in the spirit of getting us through all this, consider how you make it easily accessible. And if people don't need your product or service right now, there are other things that you can be doing. You want to be consistent with who you are as a brand. What are your brand values? Do you believe in collaboration? Maybe you can invite your customers to tell you more about what they're facing and what they need, and ask them to help you come up with solutions. In my case, I can't sell my accessories right now, but I do have a crisis background, so I'm doing crisis webinars to help people out. It feels good. So I would be careful about selling right now without acknowledging how people feel. I would reinforce who you are, what you believe in, what you do, and how you treat your customers. That's the key. It's to being true to your mission, goals, and brand personality. Nicole?
Yeah, so the next question we have is about marketing budgets. Do people still need to keep funds in their marketing budget? And what, if anything, do you need to keep in your marketing budget right now? Jeanine?
I'm going to be biased because I'm a marketing and communications person, but that's also because I can see what happens out there and I've spent a lot of time paying attention. So it's tempting for companies, and you see it across the board, to just take a sledgehammer to your marketing budget and it's gone. But communicating now is actually the best thing you can do to position yourself for the future. And there's a lot in that marketing budget that should be used right now to do that. You've got email blasts, you've got social media, and for some, advertising will still make sense. In regard to that, there's studies that go back 100 years that show that advertisers who maintain or grow their ad spending during recessions and difficult times like wars, etc., they go on to increase sales and market share during and after a recession by doing that. In the early 1900s, for example, Post cereal was the category leader. And when the flu pandemic occurred, they totally eliminated their advertising budget. Kellogg's, their rival, did the opposite, and they actually launched Rice Krispies. They came out the other side with Kellogg's being the leader, and it's stayed that way ever since. So if you completely slash your budget, you're probably going to end up playing catch up with competitors who don't do that. You'll lose current and future sales. You'll risk losing your best customers, and that's critical, to pay attention to your core customers and keep them close. You risk losing them to competitors who might offer incentives and obviously will try to steal them. And you'll also lose share of voice, which ultimately equates to share of market. So the key to using your budget wisely is to focus on those key customers and think about what you can do to help them throughout this ordeal, and how you can surprise and delight them. We all get the budget cuts will probably be necessary right now, but I would take a scalpel to it and not a sledgehammer. Nicole?
Yeah, another question that has come in pretty consistently is, people want to know what happens if they don't communicate.
So, there's some economic implications, as we just discussed, but in regard to communications in general, you got to understand that nature abhors a vacuum. It is going to be filled, and either you're going to fill that vacuum or your employees, customers, vendors, and investors will. So what creates anxiety most is anticipation, the unknown, imaginations running wild, and the way to quell that is real information. The facts you develop through your discovery efforts and other communications efforts we were just talking about. So the best thing you can do now is ramp up your communications to fill the void and focus on the different people in your stakeholder groups and building relationships with them. So we've been discussing a lot about communications, and we want to talk a little bit more about messaging. So we're going to share some tips. This is a framework that Nicole and I again created out of our experience. And all your communications during a crisis can't just be about sharing information about the crisis and what you're doing about it. So this communications framework gives you some ideas of other things you can do. In the early stages of a crisis, it's all about information. You tell people what you're doing, you inform them of your new hours, and you explain how they can rely on your business. But you can also educate during the early phases. And frankly, you'll probably be doing that across this entire crisis spectrum. You may be explaining more about your products and service and how they fit, or educating about cannabis in general, or telling people about the people and processes behind your business to give them a little behind the scenes visibility and connection with who you are and what you do. You can't really reassure people in the early stages like now, but you can let them know that you're there and willing to help. But as things progress and we get our hands around this crisis, you will be able to begin a new phase of telling people more about what you're doing to make things better, how you're going to get this through this together, and have a greater sense of optimism. Amplifying messages throughout this crisis is something you see all the time, every day. And the most important thing here is to make sure that you're amplifying messages from reliable sources. We just don't want to spread rumors. So check it really carefully. And if you need to, check it with Snopes. That's snopes.com. That's one of my favorite sites to check, false information. Crisis also brings us together. So a natural thing to do is to build community and foster collaboration. Make people feel like they're part of the solution. Like right now, Nicole and I feel better knowing we're helping people through the situation. And maybe you can do that for either your employees or even your customers. And so we want to share some questions about that too. Nicole?
Yeah. Another question that keeps coming in is, and a lot of people are wondering, what can they say that's reassuring when they themselves don't really know what's going to happen next? So do you have any thoughts about that? What should people be saying? Jeanine?
Yeah, I absolutely do. We're doing a lot of work in that sense right now with some of our clients. You may not be able to tell people what they want to hear. Let's just face it, that they'll keep their jobs, that they'll get full pay. So what can you say? My recommendation is obviously be honest and straightforward, because the trust you earn now is going to last far longer than this crisis. So really pay attention to that. And never forget to express compassion, as we've been discussing. Also, don't pretend something isn't happening if it is. In this hyper-connected world, you're going to be found out really quickly, and that will destroy that trust you're trying to build and loyalty. So if you're working to stay financially viable, doing things like taking pay cuts, we see some of that, so other people can keep their jobs, tell them you're doing that. It's not a guarantee, but you're sharing with them what you're doing. If you've already been prudent, you feel like you're going to be okay in the near term, tell them that kind of information too. And if neither of those apply, tell your employees about your guiding principles and your values, and that they can rely on you as you try to keep them employed, doing your best. But don't pretend that that's not an elephant in the room, because it is. And remember, nature abhors a vacuum. Nicole?
Yeah, so another question is, let's reflect on frequency here. People want to know, is there a rule of thumb about how often a company should communicate at a time like this? Jeanine?
So that's a tough one, because getting the right cadence is something that we all strive for all the time, and it's hard to achieve. The best way to do it is to test and build off what you learn. So don't be afraid to try communications now. I found, for example, when I sent an extra email in my series for my company, instead of making people mad, it brought me more business. So I didn't really expect that. It also depends on the stakeholder group, what they're used to getting from you, and again, what the situation is and what you're able to provide of value. Employees are the closest to you, and they have the biggest concerns. They need the most attention. I'd recommend that at least you do a weekly communication, maybe supplement that with an all-hands video meeting about what you're doing, and of course, always an open virtual door to HR. And customers need regular communications. If you're communicating once a week now, continue keeping up that cadence. But now it's about the virus. It's about what you're doing about it. It's your values and brand attributes and your goals. And when it comes to investors, it's really better to inform them, to have them reach out to you. So it shows that you're a responsible steward of the organization. And if you have a regular communication, you might think about doing more. Or if you don't have a regular communication, I would definitely think about creating one. And vendors and supply chain folks need to hear from you about what you're doing. It's hard to find great suppliers. So you need to let them know that you value working together and you've got them on your mind. So as long as your messages are valuable along the lines of what we've been talking about, you should communicate frequently. And so in that vein, we also want to give you a few do's and don'ts. On the do side, the key is think. It's a filter that works for all communications all the time. And it's something that people from Buddhists to Socrates believed in. So consider using this when you do any communication. The T is for true, the H is for helpful, the I inspiring, N is necessary, and K is kind. Um, Make sure you're adhering to most, if not all of those. On the don't side, I already mentioned not to include anything that isn't fact. And of course, don't be negative or blaming or try to minimize the situation. The hardest thing to do maybe is to not be defensive. If you're a leader, you're going to probably be blamed for something, especially when anxiety is really high. So that's where your meditation techniques come in. Do a couple of deep breaths before you answer, but really avoid seeming defensive if humanly possible. And don't be too lighthearted or optimistic when people are hurting. Be warm, be amusing, and above all, be sensitive. And now for this part, we want to look at what's in our inbox this week and how people are messaging to the coronavirus. Nicole, what's in your inbox?
Yeah, these are some of the subject lines that we thought were informative and compelling to share. So for the first one, that's from Beta Brand, and they're kind of tapping into our reality right now. I don't think a lot of us are wearing dress pants while we're working from home. So we're usually slipping from our PJs into our yoga pants. I do this often because I've been working from home on and off for the last 15 years. So they're speaking our language with this subject line. The next one is from Bizarre Voice, and they're inviting us to have a free lunch while we tune into their summit. This is a really good idea. You know, it may sound like a high cost of customer acquisition. If you factor in a $20 lunch, 100 people, that's $2,000. And if you get a 2% conversion rate to paid customers with an average check of $2,000 to $4,000, not counting the lifetime value, that's a pretty good deal. And it's a good effort. So, and I bet they get even more than a 2% conversion rate. So, and that might just be something like that might be a viable idea. And I don't know if you all remember back in the day when the sweepstakes companies, they would send a dollar bill in the letter with you to invite you to participate in the sweepstakes. And it really worked and it doubled response even. And it worked because people don't like taking something for nothing. So anyway, these are some interesting tactics. The next subject line is just a wonderful thing to read. One less thing to worry about, which taps into how we're all pretty much feeling right now. And this is TransferWise, and they're offering a free service. The next one is good news because it's talking about hiring, and hiring is such a great thing to hear at this time. So that's kind of a nice one from Ralph's. The next one is asking us how we're feeling. And that's kind of the question we're all asking each other right now. And chocolate helps, that's for sure. I don't know about you, but I love chocolate. So this one's kind of spot on. It's warm, it's musing, it's true. And the final one is a subject line. This is the moment we've all been training for how women lead. And that's a really neat one because it kind of speaks to what that organization is all about. And that's preparing leaders for moments like this. So, and being in community. And it has a little bit of urgency. So we thought these were some nice examples. Let's go into a few more examples. So this one is from Spirit Rock, and we think it's a good example of informing and educating your audience. So if you go back to our communications framework, they're doing a great job here of informing and educating us because they're letting us know, and all their stakeholders know, the steps that they're taking for the COVID-19 situation. They're delivering a message with compassion and authenticity, calling it meta, and telling us how they're providing new and different solutions given the fact that we're staying at home. So we thought this was a really nice example. The next one is very reassuring. It's from Best Buy, and it's a good example of how they're reassuring their customer base by sharing their values. So they're reassuring basically all of their stakeholders with this one message, telling us how they're treating their employees and taking care of them, that they're offering services like curbside pickup, so that there's less contact with each other. And they're really demonstrating a nice dedication, I think, to their stakeholders. Um, so, and we also like the fact that this is from a female CEO. Jeanine, you want to give us another example?
Yep. I particularly like how the CEO of Eden Labs talks about shared work and values. She points us towards a higher purpose by talking about health, sustainability, and social equity in cannabis. These are things that our community care about. And she also lets people know she's an essential business. You might not think of a lab as an essential business, but we all know that it supports essential businesses. And she expresses a brand value. We aren't wired to hunker down, and expresses her knowledge of everyone in the industry. So this is just a warm, professional, informative, inspiring, and reassuring job well done. And I just got this from TradeStation today. I love that they're reaching out right away to find out where the stress is. This is a great collaboration techniques. They're doing, you know, they stay true to their mission by talking about achieving financial goals, but they want us to tell them how they can help us do that. They also talk about rolling out new products, just like, you know, good old Kellogg's did in the early 1900s. And many people will argue that this is a good time to do that. And I particularly love that they tell you that you're getting a special gift at the end of the survey. I'm going to take it just to find out what that gift is. But if they're collecting information, this is going to serve them so well far into the future. And this one is from Get Enlightened. It's a digital out-of-home service. It's the largest POS advertising in cannabis. And we included it because it's pretty straightforward advertising. But it expresses concern and acknowledges how people feel. They then tell us why they're writing, because they're to provide insight and solutions and to make sure brand initiatives are still delivered to cannabis consumers. They bullet out their two solutions and then say they're reducing rates and adding value for new partners. So this is a very effective sales technique, and we were talking about that earlier. Now, this is a company that didn't do it so well. On March 17th, just while we were a few days into this work from home thing, I received that. It doesn't reference anything at all about how we're all feeling. It doesn't recognize that we're home. And it asks us to prioritize sales enablement when we're contracting, not expanding. So what's unfortunate here is that this is a platform that probably helps people collaborate remotely and work from home. So it would have been a far better way to introduce this product if you felt that you had a role to play right now during the crisis. So I think now, Nicole, we were going to share a couple of compassionate creativity things that we've been seeing. There's a bunch of organizations stepping out and offering solutions in support of getting through this crisis. So will you take this next slide and talk about some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeanine and I work with Burson, Conan Wolf, as she mentioned earlier, and they've compiled this really wonderful list of 75 different examples that companies are taking to give back, to help consumers, to help their different stakeholders. And we thought this list would just be fun for you to see, so that you can get hopefully inspired by it and maybe create some of your own ideas to compassionately give back. So we have all kinds of things here, like LinkedIn giving free classes. And if you go to the next slide, Jeanine, Zara is creating, the apparel manufacturer is creating masks and donating surgical masks for the healthcare workers. And if you go to the next one, we have, Ann Pizza, the CEO, is making sure that all their employees are fed as well as their families. And we have a few more Jeanine, yep. And yeah, Pop Sugar is offering free fitness classes so that we get fit while we're staying at home. So we just thought that these would be kind of nice to share and hopefully inspirational for you. Jeanine?
So everyone is proclaiming that the world has changed, and I suspect it has. You know, will we elbow bump and bow when we see each other forevermore? You know, and cannabis is social, and we like sharing joints in our vapes. And will little rubber tips be the new pet rock? And what's going to happen now that we've been designated an essential service? Does this crack open the door now for legalization in a whole new way? So the best way to get out in front of change is to pay attention to it. Be aware of the early warning signs we talked about earlier, and know that changes will come. It's scary for a lot of people. It's probably scary for all of us, but it's also filled with opportunity, as Nick alluded to earlier on in the presentation. If you can figure out how to fit into this new world, you're going to prosper. So I'm going to ask Nick now to summarize where we are, and then we're going to ask her another question or two.
Yeah, so in summary, you can take control of how you react to this crisis and help guide your company and even your family to a better future. So there's far too much to be covered on the topic of crisis communications, but if you take these guidelines that we've provided in this webinar seriously and you download the plan, you'll be well on your way. So let's recap really quickly. You start with discovery. Do a deep dive on the situation around all of your stakeholders. It will guide all of your actions. Create a plan and adapt it as you move through the crisis. You have the foundation in that download of the plan on the NCIA website. Create messaging that maps to the feelings, beliefs, and behaviors of your stakeholders. Watch what others do and learn from them as you craft your own messages. And ramp up your creativity and stick close to your values and brand so that all of your communications are authentic. So we can all be a part of the solution. We can take back our power and control. And as a leader, we can do it together. And just know that we're standing by your side as you take this journey. So you're set. You have your crisis communications manual. You have a framework. We've given you lots of suggestions on how to use it. And perhaps, the most important thing to think about and how you can be of service to your stakeholders at each stage of the crisis as it progresses. You can take back control, use these tools, and lead. So thank you so much for your time and attention today, and for caring about our cannabis community. By all means, feel free to reach out to Jeanine or myself, and let's just all stay safe and take good care of each other. So next, we wanted to go into a few questions. Jeanine, did you want to lead us in that?
I don't think we have a lot of time left, so I'm just going to ask you one, and that is, how should we handle communications? Should we find that one of our employees has either come down with the virus or has been exposed to the virus?
Okay, so what we want to recommend to everyone is that you all go directly to the websites of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization. They have phenomenal answers to this, but I'm going to address that here as well. But we really encourage you to go to those websites as a resource. So as employers, you want to reduce the transmission among employees, of course, and you want to maintain a healthy work environment across all of your business operations. So obviously, people who have symptoms should be staying home. And if someone has tested positive, like Senator Paul Rand, for example, don't go to the gym, don't go swimming, don't go play golf like he did. You should be staying home pending the result of your test. And we don't know a lot about how long people are infectious. The CDC says to wait 3 days. So that's 72 hours after there is no fever, cough, or shortness of breath, and then 7 days since symptoms first appeared. If you or your employee have tested positive but don't show symptoms, they should wait at least 7 days as long as they don't have the illness at all. And then if someone tests positive at work, send home everyone who has worked closely with them for 14 days. So work within 3 to 6 feet. Don't tell everyone who has it. Inform the building management. Close off areas used by that person and clean and disinfect them thoroughly, and wait 24 hours before you do and wearing masks and gloves while you clean. Treat the suspected cases like confirmed cases. So explain to coworkers who has worked closely within the vicinity of the person. And the EEOC has confirmed that you can inquire about an employee's symptoms if you have a reasonable belief based on the objective evidence, but just try to make sure you're distinguishing between a cold and coronavirus. And then in California, you must provide employees a CCPA compliant notice when you collect information from them. So that's a lot of information. And then finally, as some of you may or may not be aware, here are your rights as an employer. You can ask employees to stay home or leave work if they exhibit symptoms. And then you can take an employee's temperature. You can ask them to take it and show it to you. You have no obligation to report coronavirus to the CDC, and you can require an employee to notify you if they've been exposed or have symptoms or have tested positive. So that's all we have time for today. Once again, we're super grateful to have spent the time with you, and we're here for you as a resource should you have follow-up questions. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Bye now.
Bye.